My name is Zoe, I'm 30 years old, the wife of the man the entire Williams family praises as the ideal role model. Today is their annual family gathering, held at a luxury resort in the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina, where the air is crisp and everything is decorated like a ceremony honoring prestige at its peak. I sat quietly in the front row of the grand banquet hall, holding my 3-month-old daughter Riley, as the golden light shone on silk-covered tables and rows of red velvet chairs. My husband, Marcus, stood near the podium, rehearsing his speech to receive the Family Legacy Award from his father, Victor Williams, founder of Williams Medical Group, the fourth largest medical corporation in the state. Next to Marcus was a massive LED screen that would display the speech I had edited for him at 2 a.m. right after feeding Riley. He wore a custom black suit, flashing a confident smile and smug look that seemed to draw every gaze in the room. At 35, Marcus was the golden child of the Williams family. The man everyone believed embodied traditional values, dedication, loyalty, family first. At least until this morning when I saw the message on his phone. I'm not in the habit of snooping, but this time, the message popped up right on the lock screen, a short sentence that made my hands tremble as I held my baby. Last night was amazing. I can still feel your arms around me. The sender was Clara, Marcus's new personal assistant hired less than 2 months ago. I had smiled when she greeted me at the company's Christmas party, thinking she seemed polite and capable. I was wrong. The initial shock made it hard to breathe, and Riley stirred gently in my arms as if pulling me back from a daze. I unlocked his phone. The passcode was still our wedding date. Clearly, Marcus hadn't thought to change it. And then I saw everything. Messages, photos, videos, plans to start his own company, using the Williams family name and a VIP client list I had personally managed when I worked in strategic IT. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated betrayal. And during all that time, I had been at home, working remotely, caring for our child, while listening to him whisper sweet words like, everything was still intact. Zoe, let me know if you need anything, said Evelyn, my mother-in-law, gently approaching, adjusting the blanket covering baby Riley, who was sleeping soundly in my arms. Marcus is really nervous. This award is a big milestone. You're lucky having such a successful husband. I gave a faint smile. If only she knew what I knew, that smile wouldn't be on her perfectly made-up face. Thank you, Mom. I'm going to check Marcus's presentation one last time, I said, handing Riley to her. The tech team was finishing up the AV system. I stepped up to the console and plugged in Marcus's phone. As the person handling tech, he always left that part to me because you're better at it. And this time, I didn't disappoint. I knew exactly when Clara's morning video call would come through, 9:45 a.m. They called each other every day at that time as if I, his wife, didn't exist in his busy schedule. I checked the clock. 9:43. Just 2 more minutes. The room was filling up, buzzing with greetings, clinking glasses, and eager glances. My father-in-law stood at the podium, holding the framed award for Marcus. And Marcus, my husband, smiled and shook hands with each board member, completely unaware that in just a few minutes, everything he'd built on lies would be exposed on the very screen he'd asked me to help manage. I stepped back as the lights dimmed slightly. The show was about to start. Riley was still peacefully asleep in Evelyn's arms. I placed a hand on my stomach to steady my breath. Everything was ready. The truth didn't need to be shouted. It just needed the right stage and the right crowd. 9:44 a.m. ding chimed from Marcus's phone, in perfect rhythm with my racing heart. On screen, a provocative message popped up. Wake up, baby. I'm wearing your favorite color today. Don't keep me waiting too long. Signed simply. I stayed calm, held down the screen, and opened the full thread. The real name of C appeared quickly. Clara Reed. Marcus's new assistant. My eyes scanned the stream of messages, photos, even hotel room videos I had never stepped foot in. One video made my hand pause. Marcus, in that same white shirt, laughing with Clara in a room labeled Four Winds, Chicago. The problem was, during last month's Chicago trip, Marcus told me he went with his father to meet investors. I kept scrolling, unable to stop. There was even a picture of Clara in a burgundy nightgown, standing next to a laptop mid-video call labeled Monday 9:45 a.m. How long had this been going on? A month? 2? No. The earliest message dated back 8 months. When I was in the hospital delivering Riley, Clara had messaged Marcus, "Hope her labor goes well, I miss you." A hand tapped my shoulder. It was Brandon, the AV lead. "Everything okay, Zoe? This phone's connection is a little slow, but I've synced the video from the server. Just waiting on your cue to play." I nodded, slipping the phone into my dress pocket. "Thank you, Brandon, right on time. That's all I need." Marcus continued chatting with board members, carefree as ever, as if the world revolved around him. Meanwhile, I felt like I was floating between two worlds, one full of cheerful chatter, the other cold and silent, weighed down by all the evidence sitting in my pocket. Along with the flirty messages, I found a chain of emails titled Branch Strategy. The sender? Marcus. Recipients? Clara and 2 major potential clients Williams Medical was courting. In it, Marcus pitched a plan to shift focus away from his father's company, launching a new branch with a modern medical tech model. My name showed up in one line. "Zoe won't notice, she's busy with the baby and still thinks I'm doing all this for the family." I closed my eyes for a few seconds, sweat running down my spine. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. Marcus was betraying his father's trust, and the company he claimed he would carry forward. Clara sent one more photo. A hotel reservation for 2 at Coral Sands in Bermuda, from the 15th to the 20th next month. That's Marcus's birthday. And me? I had already scheduled a family celebration at Victor's estate. The final blow was a voice memo, clearly recorded by Marcus in his car. "We need to cut Zoe out of the upcoming project. She knows too much. Clara can take over, she's easier to manage." I folded the phone shut. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to scream or cry. The evidence would speak for itself. And the perfect stage was the one Marcus chose to glorify himself. "Zoe, everything look good?" Marcus's voice came from behind. He adjusted his tie and smiled. The same smile that once convinced me I was the only woman in his world. I turned and handed him the phone. "Yes, everything's ready." He nodded, gently placing a hand on my back like always, whispering, "I'm so nervous. This is a big moment." I looked straight into his eyes, voice soft as breath. "Yes. A very big moment. And not just for you." Riley still slept peacefully in Evelyn's arms. The lights dimmed, silence fell. Marcus walked on stage. Behind him, the LED screen began to glow. Just seconds left. I turned to Brandon and gave him a small nod. The video call was about to appear, and when it did, this entire hall would lose its composure. Marcus might think he controlled everything, until the one person he overlooked turned out to be the one who knew it all. Before I became a technical consultant for Williams Medical Group, I was a systems engineer. For the past 7 years I had managed all their shareholder meetings, strategy summits, and even this annual family gathering. Every time my father-in-law Victor saw the system running flawlessly, he'd pat my shoulder and say, "No one does it better than Zoe." And he was right. No one could use this system better than me. 3 days ago, before I knew anything about Marcus's affair, I personally checked the resort's AV system, high-resolution LED screens, 5G video streaming, and automatic input signal recognition. I knew that once a registered device connected, any incoming call would appear on the screen in less than 3 seconds. And I had quietly registered Marcus's phone with the central system. That way, when Clara called as usual, the signal would automatically display on the screen, right in front of the entire Williams family. No edits, no replays, just the truth, revealed, at the right time, in the right place, to the right people. I spent an entire night testing the setup, in case Marcus changed the schedule or used a different device. But he didn't. He was a creature of habit, careless in his predictability. That 9:45 a.m. call was sacred, like a ritual in their little world, no matter if I was in the next room or outside with our daughter. At 9:44, I stepped back to the wall-side row of chairs where I could see the whole ballroom without being noticed. Riley was still peacefully asleep in Evelyn's arms. Marcus stood on stage adjusting the mic. Below, his father, Mr. Victor, stepped up to the podium, his voice filled with pride. The Williams family has always been rooted in loyalty, integrity, and dedication, and today we honor the one who has carried on that legacy, my son, Marcus. Polite applause filled the room. No one knew that in just a few seconds, those claps would be replaced by stunned silence. I glanced at the control panel, a green light blinked, the signal was coming through. Suddenly the screen behind Marcus lit up. A video feed popped on. It wasn't a PowerPoint slide as expected. Clara appeared on screen, hair softly tousled, lips pink, wearing a sheer cream blouse I recognized from one of her texts. "I'll wear your favorite today." "Good morning, handsome," she said, voice sweet as honey, completely unaware she was now live in front of nearly 100 people. "I'm still trembling from last night. Don't forget about Saturday dinner. I booked the room at the Silver Bay." Marcus froze. His hands gripped the podium like he'd fall if he let go. A gasp, "Oh my God!" broke out from the front row. A few people turned to look at me, but I stayed silent, lightly touching the small remote hidden in my dress pocket. Clara kept going, unaware. "I already sent you the draft for the new business shift. They're really impressed. And Zoe? I'm sure she's still buried in baby stuff. We need to move fast before she wakes up." The shock in the room cracked like glass. Mr. Victor stood frozen, speechless. My mother-in-law stared at Marcus, still holding Riley tightly, as if letting go would shatter everything she believed in. "Clara," Marcus suddenly yelled, voice booming through the mic, "turn it off, now!" Clara paused, eyes widening as she finally realized the background behind Marcus wasn't their usual wall. It was a formal ballroom, filled with family and corporate partners watching her every word. "Oh no," she whispered and disappeared from the screen. The screen went black, no one said a word, no one moved. "Zoe," Marcus turned toward me, voice cracking. It's not what you think." I walked toward him slowly. "Not what I think? Marcus, do you really believe I didn't know? That I didn't notice the sudden meetings, the business trips during holidays? I knew everything." Victor remained still, looking at Marcus with a gaze that held no pride, only deep disappointment. I gave a polite nod to the crowd. "I apologize for interrupting the ceremony, but some truths can't wait another year." I turned and left the ballroom, feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because I got revenge, but because I reclaimed what mattered most, the truth. Marcus stood frozen on stage, eyes wide, lips moving without sound. The room felt like it had been drained of air. Moments ago those eyes sparkled with pride. Now they were filled with disbelief and suspicion. Then came Victor's voice. Cold, clear, unshakable. "Marcus, is this true?" Marcus swallowed hard, hands shaking, eyes darting as if begging someone to speak for him. But no one did. The powerful guests he once charmed, the partners who called him their perfect heir, now looked away, avoiding eye contact like dodging an oncoming storm. "Dad, it's not what you think." Marcus tried to step down from the podium, but his voice had no weight anymore. Evelyn still held Riley, her face pale. She turned to me, no longer composed. "Zoe, how long have you known?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at Marcus, held his gaze in the thick silence, then spoke. Softly but loud enough for the room to hear. "Since the moment you stopped seeing me in your life." A gasp came from behind. One of Marcus's uncles stood up, shaking his head. "At the award ceremony. Marcus, have you lost your mind?" Marcus turned to me, desperate. "Zoe, please, don't destroy everything I've built." I took a step forward, voice steady. "What did you build, Marcus? A family? An honest company? Or just a performance where the rest of us were background props?" And then, the worst thing for him happened. A second video played. The system, as I had programmed, automatically recorded yesterday's call. Clara's voice returned. "I sent the customer shift proposal. With your influence we could move at least 6 major accounts. Victor won't suspect a thing. Zoe's probably busy reading baby books." The entire room collapsed into chaos. Victor said nothing more. He walked to the center of the room, face like stone. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at me. "Zoe," he said, "could you take Riley outside for a bit? I need to speak with my son. Alone." I understood. This was no longer a celebration. It was an unspoken tribunal. And Marcus had just been exposed before the altar of his legacy. I nodded, walked over to Evelyn, and gently lifted Riley, who remained asleep as if she could feel the storm but chose peace. Before leaving, I paused beside Marcus. He reached out as if to stop me, but I only looked at him, not with rage or vengeance, but with sorrow for what had once been beautiful. "I'm not destroying you, Marcus," I said, just loud enough for him. "You did that yourself." I walked out of the ballroom as whispers buzzed behind me, the stage lights now illuminating every crack Marcus had tried to hide. In the hallway, I cradled Riley close and kissed her forehead. There was no panic anymore, no trembling, no pain, only relief. I had chosen truth over silence, strength over retreat, and I knew from that moment on, I no longer lived in that man's shadow. The conference room door clicked shut behind me. I stood still in the thick carpeted hallway, golden light spilling over Riley's peaceful face. From inside, murmurs rose. Questions, speculation, and the heavy silence of a family who once believed Marcus was the perfect heir. I didn't cry. Strangely, after all that happened, I felt calm. Eerily calm. Maybe because I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the first step in cutting ties with a life built on lies. I brought Riley back to the hotel room and called my lawyer, Marlene Carter, a sharp woman in her 40s who had helped me draft tech partnership contracts with 3 of Marcus's biggest clients. Marlene, I need to initiate divorce proceedings and I want full custody. She didn't ask why. She just said, I'll send the documents to the courthouse ASAP. Zoe, I know you're strong, but this time I'll make sure he doesn't get away back in. I nodded, resolved. Around that time, inside the meeting room, Victor Williams, the man who once pinned all his hopes on Marcus, took action. I knew because an hour later, while nursing Riley, the first company-wisely notification appeared on my phone. Effective immediately, Marcus Williams has been suspended from his role as CEO. All access to company systems and accounts has been frozen pending an internal investigation. Below that was an update. Executive Assistant Clara Reed has been terminated and is required to vacate corporate premises within 24 hours. I leaned back, listening to Riley's steady breaths. The anger had cooled. Now it was time for action. Legal, calculated, irreversible. 2 hours later, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Victor. Zoe, he began, voice no longer sharp but tired and solemn. I know this wasn't easy, but thank you for showing me the truth before it was too late. I didn't respond immediately. I squeezed Riley gently and said, I didn't do it for you, I did it for my daughter. Victor was quiet for a moment, then sighed. I've ordered the legal team to freeze all Marcus's accounts tied to the company. They're gathering evidence from IT. If he really transferred confidential data to competitors, this won't stay internal. I knew Marcus was arrogant enough not to realize Clara had left a trail everywhere. Emails, calls, attachments, all enough to qualify as serious breaches of business confidentiality. I've also instructed HR to revoke all Marcus's executive privileges, Victor added, his tone colder. He will face the consequences. As for you, if you need any support from the company, I'm here. I closed my eyes and nodded slowly. No thanks needed. Thank you, but first I need to protect my daughter from a man who doesn't deserve to be her father. The call ended. I opened my laptop. Marlene had sent the divorce draft and a proposal for custody of Riley. There was also a note. You may request compensation for reputational damage, given your public role at company events and the public embarrassment caused. I smiled faintly. Marcus once said, "You'll never understand the big leagues in business. So let me show you, I don't just understand them, I know how to end them. Legally." Before shutting the laptop, I sent Marcus one message. I'm no longer the woman standing behind you. From today, I'll stand in front, protecting everything you took for granted. I set the phone down, watching Riley stir in her sleep. A chapter was closing, and I was ready to write the next one. With me holding the pen. 3 days after the reveal at the conference, I received an invitation to lunch from Victor. The location? The top floor boardroom of Williams Medical Group headquarters. The room reserved for high-level meetings, where I used to enter as Marcus's wife, and today, as something entirely different. I arrived on time. Victor's assistant, Amelia, led me in. No other staff, no Marcus, just a long conference table, sunlight streaming through the tall windows overlooking the city, and Victor, founder of the company, rising to greet me with a look both heavy and serious. "Thank you for coming, Zoe," he said, motioning for me to sit. "And thank you for not letting Williams Medical fall because of one terrible mistake." I didn't reply. He poured tea for me, hands slightly trembling, not from fear but because he was facing a major decision. I could feel it. I reviewed all the system logs. What you did was smart, professional, and not driven by emotion. He looked at me. Do you know how many key clients you've personally retained for this company over the past 5 years? I tilted my head slightly. Probably about 1/3 of the company's annual revenue. He nodded. And they stayed, not because of Marcus, but because of you. Because they trust you. Trust your competence and integrity. I set my teacup down. Did you invite me here just to praise me? He gave a faint smile, but his gaze grew more serious. I invited you because this company needs someone like you. Zoe, the board held an emergency meeting. They want to offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer, CTO, in Marcus's place. Full authority to restructure the tech, security, and digital transformation divisions of Williams Medical. I was silent for a few seconds. This was something I once dreamed of. A true leadership role, no longer standing in anyone's shadow, no longer an unnamed technical assistant. But I also knew that anything that came quickly usually came with a cost, and I had no intention of becoming the cleanup crew without real power. I have one condition. I lifted my head and looked him straight in the eye. I want a seat on the board. Victor paused, then slowly leaned back. You know that's not easy. I know, I replied, but nothing is easy when you're a woman in a company where all decisions have been made by 5 men, who used to think I was just Marcus's wife. A long silence stretched nearly a minute. Then he sighed. Actually, I was hoping you'd say that. I proposed this condition to the board. Some were hesitant, but no one can deny now that you saved the company from a complete scandal. I was slightly surprised, though I didn't show it. So, what's your decision? He stood, walked over, and handed me a contract. CTO, effective next Monday, with a provisional board seat for 6 months. If you prove your value beyond this crisis, that seat becomes permanent. I took the contract. I didn't need to read the whole thing. I knew I would sign it. Not for the title, not for revenge, but because I wanted to rebuild what was worth saving, on a foundation free of lies. I accept, I said. Victor smiled for the first time since the family gathering. You know, Zoe, you remind me of myself when I was just starting out. Cold when needed, firm when it counts. The only difference is, you're 10 times better at tech than I ever was. I smiled. And I have a 3-month-old daughter who smiles when the code compiles. He laughed heartily. Then maybe it's time you start training Riley early. We shook hands. As I left the boardroom, it felt like I had just stepped through a massive door, not just in my career, but in my life. 1 week after I officially took over as CTO at Williams Medical Group, the fallout from Marcus and Clara's actions began to leak beyond the company walls. The media didn't know the full story yet, but the rumors in the tech and healthcare circles spread like wildfire. I stayed silent. No press conferences, no public comments. My job now was to secure the company's systems, stabilize the new tech team, and retain key clients. But that didn't stop me from keeping tabs on Marcus's side of things. Thursday afternoon, I was reviewing the new data center layout when my assistant, Evelyn, walked in with a hard-to-read expression. You need to see this, she said, handing me a tablet already streaming a live news report from Miami. On screen, Clara Reed appeared disheveled, pale, her hands cuffed, escorted by 2 police officers out of a beachfront condo. The headline running across the bottom read, Former Executive Assistant Clara Reed, arrested for suspected corporate espionage, confidential Williams medical documents found in residence. I sat in silence for a few seconds. Even though I had anticipated this, seeing it actually unfold still hit me with a sharp bitterness. Clara had walked into our office with a polite smile and a spotless resume, and behind our backs, she had stolen internal data and handed it to competitors, with the help of my husband, or rather, my soon-to-be ex-husband. There's just over $600 left in the joint account Marcus and Clara were using, Evelyn said quietly. She withdrew most of it in Miami for designer shopping, spas, villa deposits. Police say they'll be tracking every cent. I nodded, eyes still locked on the screen. What about Marcus? Detroit police are questioning him. He's still denying that he knew Clara transferred the data, but Evelyn handed over another folder. Our legal team just received a copy of emails retrieved from Clara's backup server. Nearly 70% of them were written by Marcus. He was the one who sent the VIP client list, including the original version with digital signatures. I flipped through the documents. My eyes stopped on one line. Clara, make sure the partner doesn't reveal the source. I'll handle the equity withdrawal within 30 days. The data I sent should be enough to earn their trust. There was nothing left to deny. That afternoon, the company held a short press conference. Victor, joined by the legal team and the new executive board, including me, officially announced that Marcus Williams had been stripped of all rights and was under federal investigation for violating business confidentiality and willfully leaking sensitive information. I didn't speak, I simply stood in the background representing a new generation of leadership, one that didn't build its legacy on names or bloodlines but on skill and truth. 3 days later, Marcus was arrested at his temporary apartment. When the police arrived, he was trying to wipe his personal computer, but it was too late. I was informed that Marcus could face up to 10 years in prison if convicted on all counts. Clara? Her unauthorized data transfer to a rival company carried a minimum sentence of 12 years, along with a hefty civil penalty. That evening, as I was leaving the office, I got a call from Marcus's lawyer. Zoe, Marcus wants to negotiate his personal equity stake in the company to reduce his charges. He says if you agree not to pursue personal litigation, the court might consider leniency. I looked up at the Detroit night sky. The office lights reflected in the windows like a reminder of how far I'd come. I'll let the law decide, I said firmly. And tell him, I'm no longer part of his game. I hung up and walked away, head held high. Marcus had fallen. Clara too, but I was still standing, stronger than ever, no longer in anyone's shadow. 1 year after Marcus was escorted out of the company's headquarters, I stood where he once stood, the center stage at the Great Lakes Women in Tech Conference in Chicago. But this time the spotlight wasn't for hollow speeches or empty promises. This time it was the true voice of recovery, of competence, and of trust rebuilt from ruin. I wore a navy mule suit, minimalist but commanding, standing tall before over 400 attendees, most of them young women carrying the same dream I once held. Behind me, the new Williams Medical digital logo glowed. A tree branch with deep roots and wide leaves, symbolizing the company's transformation. Has anyone here ever been underestimated because they were someone's wife? I asked to open my keynote. A few soft chuckles echoed, but I saw the knowing looks in the audience. I smiled. I used to stand backstage, I used to write slides for someone else's speech, I used to check microphones, adjust the lights, holding my 3-month-old baby behind the curtain. And then one day, I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I told them not a dramatized version of my life, but the real journey. How I used my tech skills to set up the automated system that caught the data breach. How I handled the security threats after Marcus and Clara. How I rebuilt a technical team with 40% women and led the development of our first flagship product, an AI and blockchain integrated medical record platform, now licensed at over 120 hospitals nationwide. Over the past year, Williams Medical Digital hadn't just recovered. We'd skyrocketed. Our client base grew by 63%, tech revenue more than doubled. New offices opened in Boston and San Francisco, and last week our international team in Singapore secured a contract to implement our security system at one of Asia's largest hospital chains. I stepped off stage to a long round of applause, but what moved me most was when a group of tech students approached, eyes shining. Miss Zoe, I never thought a single mom could become the CTO of a major corporation, but now I believe. I squeezed the girl's hand, feeling warmth rise in my chest. It's not that I'm weaker because I'm a single mom. It's because I'm a single mom that I have to be stronger. That evening back in Detroit, I picked up Riley from Evelyn's house, my former mother-in-law who still insisted on being Riley's grandmother despite everything that had changed. She hugged me and gently said, "You didn't just save the company, you rebuilt a family." Riley ran toward me, her tiny arms wrapping around my neck. She was nearly 2 now, and every morning she wanted to bang on the keyboard, like Mommy at work. I knew her future wouldn't be defined by labels or last names. She would grow up in a world where worth was measured by ability and character. That night I sat at my desk, quarterly report open on the screen. The numbers were all strong. But more important than the data was the peace I felt. No more anxiety when checking emails. No more fear of being dismissed. No more proving myself through silence. A notification popped up on my phone. The court has denied Marcus's final appeal. Sentence upheld. Request to divide company shares rejected. I set the phone aside, no sense of triumph, just the closing of an old chapter. A chapter once written in tears, now closing in triumph. Then I began drafting plans for our new product, MetaShield 2, the next-generation medical data security platform. This time, I wasn't writing it for anyone else. I was writing it for myself, and for the future I was building each day, with the hands of someone who had once been underestimated in every room, but never lost her true value. Late afternoon light stretched across tree-lined streets in a quiet neighborhood in North Detroit. I slowly drove down the newly paved road, pulling up to our newly renovated home, finally complete after 6 months of work. Riley sat in the back seat, eyes wide at the wooden swing hanging from the oak tree out front. She squealed, "Mommy and Riley's house is here!" I parked, stepped out, and opened her door. Together we walked through the black iron gate with floral details, up the white stone steps. This house wasn't the biggest I'd ever lived in, but it was the first I'd chosen, designed, and built with my own hands and strength. No Marcus. No one else's name on the deed but mine. We passed through the sunlit living room, past the glass wall facing the garden, where I'd planted lavender and white roses, Riley's favorites. My new office had been custom built with a 2-tier desk, the lower tier for me, the upper one for Riley to work with Mommy on weekend mornings. I played soft jazz, opened the windows and let the breeze carry in the scent of fresh wood and bergamot. Riley ran around clutching her favorite teddy bear. I sat on the sofa, tablet in hand, reviewing the latest financial report from Williams Medical Digital. Last quarter's growth had far exceeded projections. Over 200 hospitals across the U.S. had now registered for MetaShield, and we had just expanded into Canada. Our engineers in Singapore had completed the first prototype of our self-learning AI intrusion detection system. Meanwhile, the Boston team was partnering with a healthcare startup founded by 3 women. One I personally chose to fund because I saw in their eyes the same drive I once carried. I couldn't help but smile thinking about the road I'd traveled. There was a time I sat in this very kind of room. In my memories, feeling small, doubting myself, living under the shadow of a man who always made himself seem superior. Maybe it was through betrayal that I finally found who I truly was. That night, I tucked Riley into her little bed in her cream-colored room, carefully decorated with love. She slept soundly, soft curls brushing her cheeks. I stood there for a long time, watching her, and realized something beautiful. Riley wasn't just my daughter. She was living proof that I'd made the right choice. That I didn't fall. Before heading to my room, I opened the window and let the night air in. Detroit sparkled in the distance like new opportunities waiting, and I knew I wouldn't stop now. Tomorrow I'd fly to New York to meet with a new European partner about global rollout for our medical security solution. Next week I'd return to my alma mater to mentor young women in tech, and next month, I'd begin writing my first book. Not about scandal or revenge, but about the rise of a woman who chose to stand up through the cracks. I once thought Marcus was the center of my life, but now I know I am the center of my own. And when I stopped chasing validation from others, I started recognizing my own worth. Betrayal is no longer a scar, it's a beginning. Because sometimes, the hardest fall pushes you exactly where you belong. If you're strong enough to walk through the pain, and smart enough to rebuild from ashes, you won't just survive, you'll thrive like never before. I don't need anyone beside me to prove I'm worthy. I have my daughter. I have myself, and I have a wide open world waiting for me to shape it. The Detroit sky that night was as calm as the moment I first opened up to myself. No more bitterness, no more regret, only a woman who knows her worth and never needs to look back. Zoe's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes our deepest wounds open the door to our most radiant rebirth. From a woman betrayed, she rose, reclaiming her life with skill, honor, and unwavering strength. Without vengeance or resentment, Zoe chose dignity and raised her daughter in a home built on integrity. It's a message we all need. When you have the courage to walk away from what no longer serves you, you find where you truly belong. What do you think about Zoe's journey and her choices? Would you have done the same in her shoes? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt family stories to come. My name is Riley, I'm 28 years old, And if anyone had ever asked me what the happiest day of my life was, I used to answer without hesitation, my wedding day. Last June, under the golden sunset of Napa Valley, I stood beneath an arch draped in white orchids, hand in hand with the man I believed was the love of my life, Mason. It looked like a painting. Twinkling string lights hung perfectly between the trees, soft violin music echoed through the air. Our family and friends were all there, smiling, crying tears of joy as we exchanged vows. Mason looked at me with his sparkling blue eyes like we were the only two people in the world. He said all the words I'd once dreamed of hearing, that he'd love me in all circumstances, through sunshine and storms, in wealth or in hardship. I nodded through tears, heart pounding with happiness. We moved into a small house near Seattle. 2 bedrooms, a backyard just big enough for some lavender and summer tomatoes. I spent every weekend cleaning, decorating, picking out artwork and throw blankets, believing I was building a true home. Mason kept working at the same software company he'd been with for years, and I freelanced from home writing marketing content. Every day I waited for the sound of the door opening, his voice calling, "I'm home!" and the familiar soft scent of his cologne. One time I even sketched out a nursery on paper and hid it in my nightstand drawer. We used to talk about kids all the time. Mason once said, "I want to be a dad before 30, a kid who looks like you." Brown hair, bright smile. I had hugged him tight, believing that dream would come true in just a few months. But then things started to change. Not suddenly, but gradually, like a song shifting keys. Talks about the future faded during dinner. I mentioned a friend who'd just had a baby, and Mason just mumbled and turned to check basketball scores on his phone. I gently suggested maybe we could try a little earlier. He gave a dry laugh and said it wasn't the right time. Silence started settling between us like a heavy fog. I still cooked dinner every night, still rested my hand on my belly imagining a tiny life, but he was different. He came home later, often with excuses about extra work, but I began noticing his shirt smelled like cologne I didn't own. One time, I found a receipt from a downtown restaurant we'd never been to together. I tried to tell myself I was just being overly sensitive. Everyone gets tired after work. But I couldn't shake the feeling in his eyes. They no longer looked at me like that day in Napa. They looked through me. Like I was no longer part of the picture he was painting. I started counting how many times he touched me each week. Once, then not at all. The nursery sketch sat quietly at the bottom of the drawer. And I, the woman who had once been promised love no matter what, began to ask myself, what do promises mean if the person who made them no longer holds them? I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning, a morning that felt ordinary but changed everything. I didn't believe the 2 faint pink lines at first. I stared at them for 5 minutes, then sat silently on the bathroom floor, hands trembling. My heart pounded in my chest, not out of fear, but because of overwhelming emotion. Because the hope I once poured into those old sketches was now becoming real. All day I kept touching my stomach, scared and thrilled at once. I couldn't feel anything yet, but I knew something was beginning, a tiny life, fragile but heartbreakingly real. I prepared a small gift for Mason, a simple wooden box with a lid, inside it the cleaned pregnancy test wrapped in a white cloth, and a tiny pair of knitted baby socks I bought on Etsy. I wrote on the lid, "We're about to become 3. That evening Mason came home late like always. I waited to eat with him, but he just said he already had dinner with coworkers and scrolled through his phone as I served the chicken soup he used to love. I didn't get upset, I just said, "I have something I want to give you." He frowned but sat down. I handed him the box. He opened it, looked, said nothing. Then suddenly he laughed. But it wasn't warm or happy. It was cold, dry laughter that made my chest tighten. "Seriously, Riley," he said flatly, "you really did this?" I blinked. "I thought you'd be happy. You said..." "I've said a lot of things." He stood up, placed the box on the table. "But you knew now's not the time. And you still did this. Why, to trap me?" "To trap you?" I repeated, stunned. "You know," Mason looked me dead in the eye, no gentleness left. "Things haven't been great between us. You think a baby's going to fix that?" I stood frozen in the kitchen, hands clenched so tightly they went numb. I didn't do this. This is our child. And I'm not trying to trap anyone. Mason just sighed, turned away, mumbled something I couldn't catch, then grabbed his coat and walked out. No hug, no other word. The door shut behind him, leaving me alone in the kitchen light, next to baby socks no one had touched. The days that followed were thick with silence. Mason still came home, but later, colder. I started noticing things I didn't want to believe. Uber receipts from strange places, strong perfume on his shirts that wasn't mine, and fleeting messages from someone named Elki, saved with a heart emoji. I used to think I'd never go through my husband's phone, but in that moment all I had left was instinct, and it was screaming. One night while Mason was showering, a message popped up. "You're not coming again today? I miss you." I didn't feel shock, just emptiness. I couldn't sleep. I lay facing the wall, holding my stomach, whispering, "I'm sorry, baby, but I'll protect you, even if it's just me." 3 days later, Mason said he needed space, that he'd stay with a friend for a few days to think. When he wheeled his suitcase to the door, I didn't beg him to stay. I only asked, "Do you even want to be a father?" He looked at me, longer than I expected, then answered curtly, "Depends, if it's really mine." I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just stood there, watching the man who once swore he'd never leave me walk out of everything we'd built. I closed the door, locked it, then walked back inside, sat on the couch by instinct, hand resting on my belly. Inside me was the only thing left, and the only reason I knew I couldn't fall apart. I came home from my first prenatal appointment alone, holding a black and white ultrasound showing a tiny forming shape, a small heart beating inside me. The house was eerily quiet. Mason had come back while I was gone. I knew because his suitcase was no longer in the closet. Half his clothes were gone, drawers empty. On the kitchen counter sat a note, scribbled in pen, folded in half. "Don't contact me, figure it out yourself." No explanation, no meeting, just a cold sentence, ending it all like I was a torn-out page from a notebook he no longer wanted. I collapsed into a kitchen chair, clutching the note, my stomach churning not from hunger but from hollow ache. I called my mom 3 times, no answer. She was off vacationing with her new husband and had once told me, "You chose who you married, so deal with the consequences." I texted Annie, my college best friend, the one who was my bridesmaid. The message showed seen for 2 hours before she finally replied. "I'm sorry, I don't want to be caught in the middle. I hope you're okay." Caught in the middle? I couldn't believe I was reading that from the person who hugged me all night before my wedding because she worried I was overwhelmed. In the following days, my contact list thinned with every short reply. Some said they were busy, some never answered at all. A few even unfollowed me on social media after I posted the ultrasound picture. The 2-bedroom apartment had become nothing more than a hollow space. I still cooked out of habit, even though no one came home for dinner. I still listened for the sound of the key turning in the lock, still glanced at the coat hook where Mason used to hang his jacket. But nothing ever happened. The fridge slowly emptied. My bank statement didn't lie. I had exactly $2,143.00 left after paying utilities and the mortgage. My health insurance only covered part of my prenatal care. I updated my resume and applied to every freelance job I could find, writing, editing, even transcribing. I used to think I was strong, but one night sitting in the living room with my belly showing beneath a stretched t-shirt, I burst into tears when a stainless steel spoon fell to the floor, and there was no one to help pick it up. The next day I received a notice from the apartment management. Mason had submitted a request to remove his name from the lease. I was now the sole tenant and the full rent going forward was my responsibility. They even attached a copy of the email Mason sent with the line, "I no longer reside at this address, please update your records." I felt like I'd been erased from the life of the man who once held my hand in front of 200 guests and said, "Forever." With no other choice, I converted Mason's old room into a temporary office. I wrote ad copy for handmade soap while battling morning sickness, eyes stinging from exhaustion, with the scent of dish soap from that morning still lingering in the air. One chilly afternoon I decided to text Mason. Not to beg, just to ask one question. "Are you planning to take responsibility for this baby?" He replied exactly 1 minute later. "I'm not sure it's mine, don't contact me again." For the first time in my life, my hands shook so hard I couldn't press the button to lock my phone screen. That night, I pulled our wedding album from the drawer, the one I used to treasure. I flipped through each page. The way he looked at me, held my hand, smiled like he meant it. And now, all of it just made me feel like I'd been part of an elaborate performance. I didn't burn it. I simply wrapped it up and placed it in the attic, because I knew from that day on, my life no longer needed anything that only looked perfect. I needed something real, for me, and for the unborn child I swore I would never abandon. Rent was due in 2 weeks. I stared at the orange notice taped to the door, bold letters reading, "Late payment warning," like it was shouting in my face. You're about to lose everything. My bank balance showed $726.00. Insurance had denied coverage for my 20-week blood test, claiming it was unnecessary at this stage. My next prenatal appointment was already scheduled, non-negotiable. I sat at my old laptop, using the free Wi-Fi from the cafe across the street, sending out dozens of applications each day. Every website looked the same: "We'll contact you if there's a fit." No one called. But I didn't give up. I wrote blog posts for hire, edited documents for international students, even polished resumes for $25.00 apiece. Every dollar I made now wasn't just money, it was a promise to my child. At night, I didn't turn on the hallway lights to save on electricity. I ate instant noodles, boiled frozen vegetables, sometimes toasted discounted bread, but I never cut corners for my baby. I bought the best prenatal vitamins I could afford, ordered a used crib through a baby gear resale app, even though it was missing some slats and needed the screws tightened. I didn't care. I was going to make it a safe, cozy space for my baby. One weekend afternoon, I took out my toolbox and spread everything on the floor. The instruction manual was faded, the screws didn't match exactly, but I sat there tightening them one by one. My belly had grown so much that bending over was hard. Every time my back ached, I paused, placed a hand on my stomach and whispered, "I'm doing this for you, I can do this." After 3 hours, the crib was done, not perfect, but sturdy enough for me to believe my baby would be safe in it. I stood up, stepped back, and pictured my baby lying there, sleeping soundly, tiny hands reaching out for warmth. That image made me cry, not from sadness, but because for the first time, I truly felt like a mother. That night, while editing a manuscript for a client in Denver, I received an email from a small startup. "We're impressed with your writing skills. You can start next week as a remote content writer." I screamed. No one heard, but that didn't matter. I had just landed my first steady freelance contract since Mason left. The pay wasn't high, but it was enough to get by. A few days later, while folding donated baby clothes from a local charity, there was a knock at the door. I opened it. Linda, the woman from downstairs who used to scold me for making noise on Sunday mornings, was standing there with a paper bag. "Riley," she said, "I heard some things around the building. I'm not trying to pry, but if you need anything, I have some of my granddaughter's old things. They might help." I almost cried but just smiled and nodded. As she walked away, I watched her. Her frame was stiff, but her hands carried more kindness than I ever expected to find in this place. That night, I rearranged everything in the second bedroom, now officially the baby's room. The tiny dresser held a few bodysuits, a knitted blanket, some worn-out stuffed animals. The room wasn't fancy, not pastel painted, no fancy light fixture, but it was built with my own hands, with sleepless nights, and every dollar earned through relentless effort. I still didn't know what the future would hold. The freelance contract was only for 3 months. Bills kept coming. Mason still hadn't asked once about the baby. But in all that uncertainty, one thing remained absolutely clear. I would never let my child grow up feeling abandoned. I'll never forget that morning, the morning when things seemed like they were finally settling, and then the world came crashing down again. The knocking on the door was loud and urgent. I hadn't even gotten out of bed when I heard a man's voice clearly through the wooden door. "Ms. Riley Thompson, you've been summoned to court." I opened the door, heart pounding. The man handed me a thick envelope, his eyes not unkind but without any trace of empathy. I took it, frozen, as he turned and walked away. I sat on the couch, pulling out each page. A court summons from Mason. Reason: request for DNA testing to establish legal rights and obligations. And worse? He accused me of fabricating a pregnancy for financial gain, causing harm to the plaintiff's reputation and public image. I had to read that line 3 times before I could even process it. Mason's the same man who once held me and said, "I can't wait for someone to call you Mom," was now calling the child inside me a lie? I had no more tears to cry, I just felt cold. Not because I was afraid of court, but because for the first time I understood what it meant to have the truth twisted into something unrecognizable. I held my belly, looked at the crib by the window. It had once symbolized hope. In that moment it became a reminder that I wasn't just fighting for myself, but for a life that couldn't yet speak up in its own defense. I didn't have money for a lawyer, I had no wealthy relatives or powerful friends, but I had something Mason didn't. The truth. I gathered every message, every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound bill, even a voice recording from the day we found out I was pregnant. Mason's own voice saying, "I still can't believe I'm going to be a dad." That was real joy, real emotion. And I had saved it instinctively, never knowing it might one day be evidence. A week later I took the bus to the northern suburbs where Mason's parents lived. I'd never been close to them, but I thought, surely they would care about their grandchild. The white gate opened on my second ring. Elaine Mason's mother stepped out. Her hair was perfectly styled, makeup subtle, but her expression colder than any winter I'd ever felt. "Riley," she said, voice faltering slightly when she saw my very obvious bump. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I began calmly. "I just wanted to talk, at least, for the baby's sake." She folded her arms, standing at the doorway, not inviting me in. "I think Mason made himself clear. He says it's not his." I was stunned. "But you used to say you wanted grandkids. You toasted our wedding, said you couldn't wait to hear a baby's laughter in the house." "I used to believe that," she interrupted, expression blank. "But after what Mason's told me, I don't know what to believe." "You don't have to believe me," I said, lips trembling. "Just ask yourself this. Would a pregnant, broke, homeless woman really make something up just to get taken to court?" She said nothing, just turned away and muttered quickly, "I think you should go, before the neighbors see and start asking questions." I stepped back onto the sidewalk, not looking back. I didn't want her to see me cry. Honestly, I didn't need her to. I only needed one thing, justice. When I got home, I organized all the paperwork into a neat folder. I labeled it with a black marker. Evidence, not just words. I knew I was about to step into a battle that wouldn't be easy, but I hadn't broken when my husband left. I hadn't given up when my friends turned away. And now, I wasn't going to let lies shake me. Because if Mason could so easily deny a child who hadn't even been born, then I, the only mother that child had, would stand tall, face everything, and speak the truth. The day I stepped into the hearing room, the Seattle sky was as gray as usual, but my heart had never felt so clear. In my bag was a nearly 50-page file. Everything I had collected over the last 3 months. Prenatal results, appointments, messages, recordings, and even the handwritten note Mason gave me one January night that read, "I can't wait for the day I get to be called Dad." I wore a plain black dress, not to impress but to remind myself that today was serious. This was no longer about me and Mason. This was about a mother standing up for her unborn child. Mason walked into the courtroom in a dark blue suit, shoes polished to a shine, flanked by his private attorney, a tall, silver-haired man with sharp eyes. I recognized the type instantly. Never said more than necessary, hired for one purpose only, to twist the truth. The hearing began with Mason's lawyer presenting his side. He spoke fluently and clearly, painting me as unstable, unemployed, and fabricating a pregnancy to trap his client. I stayed silent. I didn't react. I had prepared for this. When it was my turn, the judge, a woman in her early 50s with silver-rimmed glasses, asked if I had anything to present to the court. I stood up and handed over my documents, hands steady. "I have concrete evidence, text messages, appointment records, ultrasounds that list the father's name, and an audio recording from the day we found out I was pregnant." He expressed his feelings and even discussed baby names. The judge took the folder and flipped through the pages. She didn't say anything, just nodded lightly, as if mentally noting each piece. "The court grants the request for a DNA test," she said afterward, looking straight at Mason. It is a fundamental right to establish responsibility, and responsibility cannot be denied with mere words. Mason glanced at his lawyer, his face noticeably paler. The smirk he wore earlier had disappeared. I walked out of court with a different feeling. I hadn't won, but the truth had held its ground, and I knew I was no longer alone. That night, something unexpected happened. While I was typing an article for a new content project, I received a message from an unfamiliar account named Denise L. The message simply said, "I know Mason Dalton, and I believe you." I frowned. Denise? We met at a small cafe near Capitol Hill. She was a woman in her early 40s, dark curly hair, wearing a beige trench coat and carrying a folder. Her eyes were calm, but there was a sharpness in them. Like she'd walked through fires I had only just begun to feel. "I was involved with Mason," she began, her voice low but clear. "6 years ago. I was pregnant too, denied just like you, dragged into court too." I was speechless. "I didn't have evidence back then," she continued, pulling out a USB drive. "But I saved emails, recorded phone calls, and kept a handwritten journal. I didn't get to use them. I miscarried from the stress." My hands tightened under the table. Denise placed the USB drive in front of me. "I don't need him to pay for what he did to me," she said. "But if anyone can make him face the truth, it's you. And that child." I took the USB. My hands weren't shaking from fear but from emotion. A week later, I submitted a request to the court to admit third-party evidence. It wasn't easy. Courts usually don't accept testimony from unrelated individuals. But I included a detailed letter explaining this wasn't just emotional narrative. This was systematic proof of repeated behavior, real harm, and the risk of ongoing harm if left unchecked. 4 days later, I received a letter of confirmation. The court agreed to review the supplemental evidence at the next hearing. I sat quietly in the baby's room, the crib still there, the soft quilt Denise had given me neatly folded inside. I gently ran my fingers over the ultrasound picture taped to the wall. I didn't know when the DNA results would arrive. I didn't know what else Mason might pull. But I knew this. I was no longer walking alone. And the truth doesn't need makeup to stand tall. It only needs to be spoken. Clearly, firmly, and without apology. The final hearing took place on a strangely clear morning in early October. I entered the courtroom 35 weeks pregnant, my breathing a bit heavier, but my mind light. I carried an old canvas bag, not just filled with legal files but also the recording of Mason saying he couldn't wait to be a dad, and the USB Denise had bravely handed me. Mason arrived a few minutes late, same tailored suit, neatly combed hair, and his lawyer beside him, but this time his face wasn't composed. His eyes darted when he saw me, and when he saw the judge's expression, no longer patient with theatrics. The judge opened the session by announcing that the DNA results had been processed and would be read into the official record. The courtroom went still. "Based on the biological samples collected and analyzed from both parties," she read from the file without lifting her eyes, "the results confirm Mason Dalton is the biological father of the child carried by the plaintiff, Riley Thompson." I closed my eyes for a second, not because I was surprised, but because what I'd known all along, what I had been forced to prove like a defendant, was now confirmed, clearly and undeniably. Mason's lawyer jumped up, flipping through documents, about to speak, but the judge raised her hand, her voice icy. "We're not finished." She turned to another file, the evidence I had submitted. In addition to attempting to deny responsibility for his biological child, the defendant is accused of making false statements with the intent to defame the plaintiff. Testimony from third-party witness Denise Lawson, including emails, audio recordings, and written declarations, aligned fully with the defendant's current behavior. Mason began glancing around the courtroom. His face shifted, not confident, not defiant, just unraveling. I could see it in every shallow breath. The judge continued. "Based on the evidence presented and the plaintiff's testimony, the court finds that the defendant has willfully evaded responsibility and caused emotional, financial, and reputational harm to the plaintiff. Therefore, the court orders the following. The defendant must pay monthly child support beginning at the child's birth through their 18th birthday. The defendant is liable for prenatal medical expenses, emotional damages, and all legal fees the plaintiff incurred. The defendant is prohibited from making any public statements that are defamatory or misleading regarding this case. The courtroom was heavy with silence. Mason sat with his head down, hands clenched on the table. I knew he was trying to hold himself together, but I could feel the collapse in every unsteady breath. I didn't feel joy, I didn't feel vindicated, I just felt free. Justice didn't take me back to who I was, but it gave me and my baby a new starting point, one built on truth, not denial. As I exited the courthouse, I saw Mason's attorney storming off toward the parking lot, his face like ice. Mason stood alone at the end of the hallway. No lawyer, no composure. He looked at me. A glance that seemed to want to say something, but I didn't stop. I kept walking past the courthouse doors into the brilliant golden sunlight of fall. I pulled out my phone and texted Denise. The truth is out, my baby and I are no longer shadows. It showed read just seconds later, followed by a single heart. That was all, but it was enough to remind me I hadn't fought this battle alone. That night I sat on my bed, hand on my belly, feeling the gentle kicks inside. I opened a drawer, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and wrote the first line of a journal I would one day give to my child. My love, today your mom stood up, and because of that you'll grow up in truth, not silence. I folded the page, slid it into an envelope, and labeled it. The day truth won. Not your father, but the truth. 2 weeks after the hearing, I received an unexpected email from the court-appointed legal liaison, Marissa Lane. During the trial, she was the only one who looked at me not just with professionalism but with understanding. She wrote, Riley, if you're open to it, I'd like to invite you to visit the Summit Haven Legal Support Center. There are many here who've been left behind, who've had to prove their worth against accusations, and I think you have something they need, a real voice, unafraid. I read that email no less than 5 times. I wasn't a lawyer, not a specialist, I was just a mother who'd weathered her own storm. But maybe that's exactly why I understood what it felt like to stand alone in a courthouse hallway, pregnant, heartbroken. I went to Summit Haven on a Tuesday morning, bringing my medical records, court documents, and the notes I'd written just to keep myself from falling apart. The center was on the 3rd floor of a modest building with a small waiting room, a few old wooden chairs, and a bulletin board filled with handwritten notes. Marissa shook my hand firmly. She didn't ask much. She just said, You don't need to do anything big. Just tell it exactly how you lived it. That's enough. At my first talk during a workshop for newly single mothers, I understood what she meant. I told my story. My voice trembled at first, but the more I spoke, the quieter the room grew. The women didn't look at me as a victim. They nodded, held hands, and looked at me as if hearing their own hearts speak. I started volunteering at the center 2 days a week, helping lead support groups and assisting moms who couldn't afford lawyers fill out legal forms. I no longer felt defined by pain. Instead, I began to see the value in everything I had endured. Not to relive it, but to light the way for someone else. Then on a misty November morning, I went into labor. No Mason, no message from his family, and none needed. It was just me, a young nurse named Lexi, and a compassionate OBGYN. The pain lasted nearly 10 hours. There were moments I wanted to give up. But then I remembered Marissa's eyes, Denise's hand on mine the night she gave me that USB, the tiny heartbeat on that first ultrasound, and I kept going. And then, with one deep breath and the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, my baby cried for the first time. A baby girl. Her skin was rosy, her soft black hair fine as silk, and her tiny hand clutched at my gown the second they placed her on my chest. I broke down crying, overcome by a peace I'd never known before. Not because I'd won, but because the purest kind of love had arrived. I named her Isla, the name I had written in a small notebook the moment I found out I was pregnant, a gentle name meaning island, because she had been my refuge in the storm. We came home 3 days later. No party, no congratulations. But my little apartment had never felt warmer. The crib by the window finally had someone to hold. I hung a small paper lantern above it and wrote my first promise to her. You will grow up in truth, in love, and never as a burden. One afternoon while I was nursing Isla, I got a call from Summit Haven. Marissa invited me to join part-time as a support group coordinator. We don't need someone perfect, she said. We need someone who stood in the dark and chose to light a candle instead of cursing it. I said yes without hesitation. Life after the trial wasn't covered in roses. There were still nights I woke up from haunting memories, still days when my budget felt stretched to its limit. But I was no longer living to survive, I was living to build. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't speak ill of Mason. I simply moved forward, leaving the truth behind me like a mark that couldn't be erased. Because I knew some victories don't need applause. They just need a newborn cry and a mother's arms, ready to hold. That afternoon the weather turned suddenly cold. Rain tapped gently against the living room window. I had just rocked Isla to sleep when the doorbell rang. 2 short, firm chimes, unfamiliar. I wasn't expecting anyone. Neighbors usually knocked. People from Summit Haven always texted first. I held Isla close, stepped quietly to the door, and peeked through the peephole. The woman standing there made me take half a step back. Owain, Mason's mother. A light gray fur coat hung damp across her shoulders from the drizzle. She no longer looked as polished and elegant as the last time I saw her, when she shut me out behind that pristine white gate. Her face looked pale, but her eyes... those eyes no longer held the avoidance I once saw. I opened the door slowly. Isla slept soundly in my arms, her breath soft, like a whispered reminder of peace. "Hello, Riley," she said first, her voice deeper than I remembered. I know I shouldn't be here, but if you could spare me a minute, I'd be grateful." I said nothing. Part of me wanted to close the door just like she once did to me. But then I looked at Isla. My daughter deserved to grow up free from the weight of things left unsaid. I nodded and stepped aside, signaling her to come in. We sat in the living room. I placed Isla in the bassinet beside me and gently rocked her back to sleep. Elaine sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly, eyes not on me, but on the crib where my daughter lay peacefully. "She looks so much like Mason," she whispered. I didn't respond. "Mason didn't tell me everything," she continued. "It wasn't until the court ruling that I learned the truth. Not from him, but from someone who happened to be there. And when I read the news coverage, I felt ashamed. Not of what my son did, but of myself, for choosing to believe the wrong person." I stayed silent. The anger I once felt was no longer sharp like a blade, but it still smoldered, like a fire not yet out. "I read the letter you sent Mason and the words you said in court," she said, her voice catching. "I don't know if you'll believe this, but I truly looked forward to holding my grandchild. And yet, I turned my back when it mattered most." For the first time, she looked me in the eye. "I'm not here to justify anything. I just want to say I'm sorry. And if you'll allow it, I'd like to meet Isla. Just once. If you say no, I'll leave right now." I looked down at Isla. She was still asleep, her tiny hand resting near the edge of her blanket, eyelids fluttering gently. I remembered Elaine's eyes at the gate, cold, resolute, and her eyes today, tired but sincere. I nodded slowly. She leaned toward the bassinet, not to pick Isla up, just to look. Her eyes reddened and tears began to fall silently down her cheeks. "I'm sorry I didn't believe your mother," she whispered, barely audible. In that moment, I didn't forgive her. But I no longer felt the need to punish her either. Because I understood, sometimes people take longer to arrive at the truth. And just as I once needed someone to give me a chance, today I chose to give that back. Not for her, but for Isla. Every child deserves to grow up surrounded by love, even from those who once made mistakes. As she stood to leave, she paused at the door and asked, "May I visit sometime? Not often, just if you're okay with it." I didn't answer right away. I just said, "I won't close the door, but everything takes time." She nodded. "I understand. Thank you, Riley." The door closed behind her, but this time there was no feeling of abandonment or being cast aside. I turned to Isla, kissed her forehead and whispered, "We don't get to choose where we start, but we can choose how we write the rest." Every morning as sunlight filters through the little window in our second-floor apartment and Isla giggles in her crib, I'm reminded that life, after everything, is a kind of miracle. I no longer count pennies in my wallet, no longer lie awake wondering if I'll have enough for formula tomorrow, not because I won the lottery or someone rescued me, but because I chose to stand up, and brick by brick I rebuilt my life with trust and grit. After starting work at Summit Haven as a group coordinator, I was invited to speak at a seminar for single mothers who had experienced divorce or abandonment. At first I declined, partly from shyness, partly because I didn't believe my voice carried much weight. But Marissa said one thing that changed my mind. "Riley, no one wants a story like yours, but a lot of people need to hear it." I stepped onto the small community center stage, hands freezing, heart pounding loud enough to hear. But when I looked out at the women, tired eyes still lit with hope, I began to speak. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. I talked about the day Mason left, the night I built a crib alone, the moment my baby cried in the delivery room, and I knew, even if the whole world turned its back, I never would. The talk ended in long applause and tearful hugs. A young woman named Kelsey came to me, eyes misty. "You don't know this, but I was about to give up fighting for the baby I'm carrying. After hearing you, I think I'll try one more time." That night, after Isla fell asleep, I wrote the first entry in my old notebook in months. My story is no longer a tragedy, it's proof that justice can come when we stop staying silent. Since then, I've been invited to speak in many places. A shelter for abused women, a college workshop, a community gathering at the local cultural center. I have no title, no advanced degree, but I have experience and truth. More and more women come to Summit Haven just to meet me. Not because I'm anyone special, but because they see something familiar. Someone who's been hurt, doubted, dismissed, but stood back up, not to take revenge, but to live. Marissa and I started a new program called A Mother's Voice, where single moms are trained as peer mentors, sharing experiences, filling out legal forms together, writing financial aid letters, and, most importantly, making sure no one feels alone. One afternoon while preparing for the weekend's workshop, I found a folder on my desk. It was from a local high school, inviting me to speak to a group of 12th grade students about women's rights and choices in family life. I read the letter, looked at Isla playing with her stuffed bear, and smiled. The past didn't disappear, but it no longer defined me. I still lived in the same small apartment, still took the bus every morning, still brewed coffee in the old machine I bought secondhand. But I lived in freedom. Freedom from judgmental stares, from the shadow of demeaning words. Isla grew day by day, her bright eyes and gleeful laughter making the whole building smile. She didn't know how she came into this world, but one day when she's old enough, I'll tell her, with honesty, not bitterness. I won't tell her about the one who left. I'll tell her about the one who stayed. Because this journey, though born in tears, has become a path of light. And I know I'm still walking it. Not as someone who was left behind, but as someone who leads the way. Riley's story is proof that the greatest strength doesn't lie in striking back at pain, but in standing up, speaking the truth, and choosing to live with purpose. From a woman abandoned during pregnancy, she became a voice for those who had once been silenced, doubted, and forgotten. Riley didn't just win justice for her child, she inspired hundreds of other women to realize that the past does not define you.